what we have seen in a previous series, when we were talking about populism, is that populism is on the rise in West and in the United States. Donald Trump is an example of a populist. We see populism in Europe, in France, in Italy, in Hungary, and in many other countries. How come populism has become so popular? And we try to look at what is driving populism. And we looked at a video from Ian Bremmer, and Ian Bremmer separates globalization and globalism, and he makes a connection between globalism and populism. So globalization in itself, Ian Bremmer judges to be very positive, because it has grown the world GDP, it has brought world poverty, the percentage of people who live in absolute poverty in the world down from 2/3 in the last century to about 20% in this century. Healthcare has improved. More people have more opportunities. We see multinationals are growing their presence in many parts of the world, bringing employment, bringing more wealth to these countries. So in that respect, globalization has delivered for the people, but not for everyone. The people in Western world, especially the middle class, they have suffered the consequences of globalization. They have seen their jobs disappear. They have not seen their real wages increase over the past 20 years, and they have been told that globalization is good. That brings them prosperity. Well, it brings some people prosperity, but certainly not all, and certainly not them. What we have seen is that actually the difference between rich and poor has been increasing. Some people who are better educated, who are better equipped to reap the benefits of globalization, have taken it all, and while others have stood by the sideline and saw their position erode. So there are a kind of it's not the same situation everywhere, but what populism does, it made it clear that the people who have been suffering are not the ones to blame. It's the people who have been lying to them, who have broke down the system and gave preference to their circle, to their children, and so the system is broken. Something that Trump uses a lot. The system is broken. It's the immigrants who come into our country who take our jobs. But he doesn't talk about technology. He doesn't talk about the fact that actually a lot of those jobs did not disappear because of immigrants, but they actually because of new technology. Now in Europe, immigration is also plays a very important role. The situation here is a little bit different. There's a smaller gap between rich and poor, but the number of immigrants that have been flowing into Europe has grown dramatically because of war, because of poverty in Africa, but also because of war situation in the Middle East. We've seen many refugees coming into Europe, and this has angered the middle class in Europe, because they have seen that actually they lost their jobs. So the government is not taking care of them. Why are they taking care of all these immigrants? So that is also powering a flow of populism. And it all has to do with how the government is not taking care of its people, the people who have not seen any progress. So when we were looking at possible solutions, so how can we fix globalism? How can we fix globalization? How can we make sure that everybody benefits? We looked at job guarantees. We looked at universal basic income. We looked at the importance of training in order to prepare people for globalization, and the fact that it takes time to transform yourself from a taxi driver to a software programmer, to give you but one example, or to start a new job as a courier. But these kind of frictions in the economy, we need to acknowledge that it costs time for the economy, for the labor market to change. And in order to do that, we need to basically help the losers of globalization, of globalism, to transform themselves and to weather the economic impact during that transition. Now, universal basic income seems to be a recipe that has the potential to work, but the problem is that we are at the same time confronted with a evaporating tax base. So less and less taxes are flowing into the in the hands of the governments, because the people who the winners of globalization, the winners of globalism, they have access to a global economic network, global financial network that enables them to find the lowest tax havens in the world. And that's when we started to look at the VPRO documentary to show how that really works, to show how it is possible that a company like Facebook effectively pays 1.9% of profit tax in the United States, where American companies have to pay 35%. Facebook, who is the big winner of globalization, effectively only pays 1.9%. And other companies like Facebook, like Apple, they also pay a very limited tax amount. So that has caused a lot of people to actually to see that actually, okay, so we really live in a rigged system where the average guy needs to pay 35%, but the rich people only pay less than 2% of profit tax. How can that be? And if we don't have enough taxes, how are we able to help the average person to transform him or herself and to adjust to the globalized world? So that is what we were looking at. And we were looking at tax havens, we were looking at the consequences, we were looking at examples of where tax havens are being created. We saw that there are tax havens in the Caribbean, but there are also tax havens in Europe. Netherlands is a very famous example of a place where intellectual property, the profits made of intellectual property are comparably low with the rest of the world, which causes a lot of companies to set up their headquarters for European operations in the Netherlands. Then the profit tax is zero in certain islands in the Caribbean, the Cayman Islands, and there are a few other examples. So there are different places in the world, and it's very easy to open up a mailbox company. As we saw in the video, there were two Dutch journalists who were looking into that. They tried to actually figure out what exactly they do, but in reality what you see is that these companies only exist on paper. They don't have any employees. The revenue that is being generated in other countries comes in, touches the bank account of these mailbox offices only for a second, which is enough to leave a paper trace, which is enough to reduce their tax burden. So this has become the new norm for these globalized companies. But it also causes many problems, because if, for example, a company like Shell is producing oil, is basically taking oil out of the soil of Nigeria, but opens its fiscal headquarters somewhere in the Netherlands, that means that all the burdens remain in Nigeria, because basically the oil there disappears, and the benefits, they evaporate. They go directly into the hands of the shareholders of Shell. Another problem that exists, what we saw in Africa and this is where the video is going to start, that in Africa there are now many countries who are creating these mini free trade zones. If you open up your multinational or a branch of your multinational in these tax-free zones, then you get all kinds of tax benefits. That sounds like a good idea, but it's basically a race to the bottom. These countries are competing with each other to get the lowest, to offer the best conditions, to give them a tax holiday, as it's called, where they don't have to pay taxes for the first 7 years. And then once they start to make profit in these countries, then the normal taxation starts to kick in. And in the video where we left off, somebody from Kenya who has studied this phenomenon, has looked into this phenomenon and to the actual economic effects, is interviewed there, and she claims that these tax holidays, they don't do any good, because once the tax holiday is over, the multinational disappears and finds a new place with a new tax holiday and a new country where they open up their operations. So basically, they are capable of enjoying a tax-free life by just moving their operation, their headquarters, from country to country, and the African nations are not benefiting. So that's where we left off. So would you mind starting the video?
So, do you want to continue video now?
Yes, please.
Okay.
So that's the argument. The argument, the key here is that because there are legal frameworks in place and that deals can be made with countries all over the world, nobody, but basically, like for example, the Netherlands, who gives tax breaks to in terms of intellectual property rights. If there is another country who thinks, okay, but I would like to take over that operation, they can create a tax break that's even more attractive than the tax break in the Netherlands. And then what will happen is probably everybody who has put up their headquarters in the Netherlands, they will move to the other country and pay even less. So what happens, for example, in a company like Starbucks? Starbucks, they offer coffee in Germany. They sell a cup of coffee for 2-3 euros, let's say 3 euros. But then that coffee has a brand name, and because of that brand name, it has a higher value than it would normally be selling for. Because it's called a macchiato, people are prepared to buy the same cup of coffee for twice the price. That €1.5 that goes to the Netherlands, and the actual intellectual property tax that they need to pay on that is €1.5 times maybe 2% or maybe even less. So there you pay your taxes. Your profit is reduced in Germany by 50%. Because you need to pay, or you need to realize that you need to pay off your intellectual property rights. But that intellectual property tax only pays for 2%. So then there you cut your tax burden in half, and you're doing everything legally, so it's not illegal. But obviously, as the woman in the parliamentary debate is posing there, countries like Starbucks, they are benefiting from the infrastructure that's been put into place with tax money in Germany. They have social stability, they have infrastructure, they have educated workforce. It's all being paid for by tax money. And by reducing your tax burden, basically you're not paying into the system that you're benefiting from. So that's where the problem lies. Basically, these tax evasion schemes, they are designed to reduce the tax burden and do that in a legal way. But actually, if you would totally disclose what you're doing, if you would show the entire tax infrastructure that you've created, a lot of consumers would be very upset because they realize that these consumers are paying profit tax to the extent of maybe 30-40%, while the companies that are making huge profits, they're not paying any tax in the country where they are using that they are using all the benefits from. So that is the big issue.
By the way,
That is why.
By the way, this tax system is the same as before. Now
Well, the
they
tax
don't
system-
pay any tax in England.
They pay tax in England, but they don't pay any income tax. For example, in what's it called, the famous islands in Cayman Islands.
No, they she said just they pay tax in Holland, but not in Britain.
Right. So they paid some taxes, but a very
In Holland, the tax rate is cheap.
Yeah. So intellectual property right is taxed for a very limited amount. That's why a lot of people put up these mailboxes.
But he didn't tell how many percentage pay in Holland.
No, because actually the Netherlands makes tax deals with the likes of Amazon, with the likes of Starbucks. So they make there's not an official tax rate. They basically go to them and say, hey, we want to open up our headquarters in Europe, but what can you do in terms of tax?
Also, they actually they don't pay tax in Holland. They are moving headquarters at Cayman Island.
They pay marginal amount, and but a lot of money flows in. So a marginal amount of a substantial amount of money is still quite a lot of money because these companies make huge profits. Starbucks and Amazon and Google and Facebook, they make huge profits.
Yeah, by the way, Starbucks they don't pay tax in Britain, and they said paid in Holland. But actually, they are not paid in Holland. They are moving that the profit.
No, because then the after it's been taxed, the profit moves on to a different shell company, and that's usually on the Cayman Islands.
Actually, finally, they are paying, moving the headquarters.
Exactly. So only the property tax is paid in the Netherlands. That reduces the burden, and then it goes to a zero profit tax haven. Someone in the Cayman Islands. So
sorry, I don't know the property tax. What does it mean? Property tax.
Profit tax.
Huh? What is it?
Tax.
Profit tax.